Hey everybody, it's great to see you today. Welcome to Living Power. This is your online Bible study where we're walking through the Bible in a year. Today we're in a little bit of Isaiah, we're in a little bit of Hosea, and 2 Kings. So I'm going to give you a lot of different material because the text covers a lot of different material today. And you know what? I just can't help but review something in yesterday's reading. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to briefly take you back to yesterday's reading because it is just so important. In Isaiah 10 and 11, we see a little bit of eschatology, which is pertaining to the end times. When I say eschatology, I mean the 7-year tribulation period. It could mean the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, which comes right after that. It could mean the day of the Lord, which you will see referred to exactly in that way, the day of the Lord, which is actually the last 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period, which happens right before the millennial reign. So I would suggest that you start keeping a notebook now or a separate series of pages in your notebook on eschatology, because the reason people have trouble with the end times is because it's not laid out in one book or in one order in the Bible. There are pieces that you have to put together, and it could take a lifetime to put all these pieces together. So I'm going to try to point out as we go through some of these pieces, and you might want to just put them all in one place in your notebook. In Isaiah 10, verse 12, I want you to see that it says, "After the Lord has used the king of Assyria to accomplish his purposes on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, he will turn against the king of Assyria and punish him, for he is proud and arrogant." What is happening in the reading historically is that God, through Hosea and these two other prophets, Isaiah covers it, and who was it that we just talked about? I can't remember, and I'm not going to stop, but there are multiple prophets that talk about the invasion of Assyria. Assyria is going to come and destroy Samaria in 722 BC. It hasn't happened yet. I think in the history we're about 25 years away from that, actually, and we learned a couple of days ago that God always, through his prophets, tells the people what is going to happen, and he has certainly proclaimed that this is coming. In this verse, though, it says the king of Assyria is not going to be let off the hook, for God uses any nation, anything to accomplish his purpose, and when he is done using Assyria, he will then come and punish Assyria, and in 609 BC, Assyria actually falls to Babylon. So I wanted you to be aware of that. In Isaiah 10, starting with verse 20, my Bible says the section is called Hope for God's People. This is a beautiful section on the millennium. It continues over into Isaiah 11, and it talks about Jesus. You just see him in Isaiah 11. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him in verse 2. Of course, that was true of him when he came and lived on earth. In verse 15 of chapter 11, the Lord will make a dry path through the gulf of the Red Sea. He will raise his hand over the Euphrates River. You can continue to see that, but when Jesus returns, a second Exodus will take place, and he will part the Red Sea yet again for a second time, and this is so Israel can return to their land as he ushers in the millennium. Such good things here in Isaiah 11. But today we need to focus on Isaiah 12 in our reading and Isaiah 17. And that's where I'd like to start us off today is Isaiah 17. It says, "This message came to me concerning Damascus. Look, the city of Damascus will disappear." Historically, this happened. Assyria defeated Assyria, which in our Bible is also referred to as Aram, A-R-A-M. It means the same thing. Damascus is the capital. This happened in 732 BC. So this has already happened. I told you Assyria defeats Samaria in 722 BC, which is actually coming. And Assyria falls to Babylon in 609 BC, which we've talked about. Okay, that kind of gives you a little bit of background as to the history. I think Hezekiah was the prophet that I was trying to think of earlier. But isn't it interesting how this particular Bible is laid out, that you can actually see, oh, there were multiple prophets prophesying at the same time. And sometimes you can't tell that the way that it's the Bible is normally laid out. So chronological is certainly helpful. Two things I want to tell you before we talk about Hosea. King Ahaz and Hezekiah. It's important that we understand a little bit about them. Let's talk about King Ahaz for just a minute. King Ahaz is the ruler of Judah. So we're talking about the southern kingdom when we read about him. He's a bad king. He started off reigning when he was 20. He reigned till he was 36 years old. The virgin birth prophecy that we know and love came through Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 7 verse 10, and it originally came to him, King Ahaz, as a sign that at this moment he would not be defeated and Judah would stand. You see, the nation of Israel was comprised of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and they were defeated at different times in history. King Ahaz was a bad king, however, and it sort of surprises me, I don't know if it does you, that this beautiful virgin birth prophecy that Jesus the Messiah would come through a virgin was actually given as a sign to King Ahaz in his time. And this is originally where it was spoken. Isaiah spoke, Isaiah chapter 7, he spoke of it. And it's just interesting that this was the origination of it. This is where it all began. Back to King Ahaz. Why was he a bad king? Did you pick up a couple things in the reading? First of all, he sacrificed his own son in the fire, it says. He offered idolatrous sacrifices everywhere. And when he was attacked by Syria and Israel came to him and said, come on into our coalition because Assyria is getting very strong. King Ahaz says, no, I'm not going to do that. They attacked him. Syria and Israel attacked him. So he goes to Assyria for help. And God is very upset with this coalition because, as we see in the Old Testament, God is all Israel needs. They don't need anyone else. They don't need any other coalitions. And it angers God when they go into these political alliances. King Ahaz gave Assyria some of the precious items from the temple treasury. And Isaiah ends up telling him, Assyria is going to attack you for this alliance that you have entered into. And they do. They do attack Ahaz. I think it's in 2 Chronicles 28:20. And one of the things that was so shocking to me in 2 Corinthians 28:24, we know he was a bad king, but he offered sacrifices to the god of Damascus, and he shut the temple in Israel, in Judah, in Jerusalem, so no one could worship. He dies in 716 BC. His son, Hezekiah, the king, was the best king in the southern kingdom of Judah. He was 25 years old when he began to rule, and he ruled 29 years. He reigns jointly with his father, Ahaz, for 6 years. That surprises me. How did they even get along co-reigning like that for so long? And how did such a good king come from such a bad person? King Ahaz. Hezekiah removed the shrines and the Asherah poles. Now, let's talk about Hosea. We're going to be in Hosea for the next 2 days. Hosea's ministry ran from 750 BC to 725 BC. I want to give you a little introduction here. Hosea is a sweet, sweet book. It's one of the 12 minor prophets, and I love it. It's one of my favorites. Let me show you why. In Hosea, we see God as a heartbroken groom. And some people say, well, God is God's spirit. He can't have emotions. Yes, he does. He has very strong emotions, and we see his heart being broken today. I can't wait to show you. Hosea's name means salvation, and Hosea is actually the same name as Israel, the northern kingdom's last king. We see that as Hoshea, Hoshea, and that little H is inserted there in the name. It's the same name. It's in 2 Kings 17, verse 1 to 4. We see that that was the name of Israel's, the northern kingdom's last king. It was also Hosea. It was also the original name of Joshua. Remember Joshua who led the people into the promised land and said, yes, we can take the land? Moses changed his name. Hosea was his original name. Moses changed it to Joshua. That was in Numbers 13:16. You can go back and review that. Now, Hosea marries this prostitute named Gomer, and he does it because he is God's prophet, and God says, I want you to do this to show a life picture to my country, my people Israel, so that they can see how they have turned from me. They are prostituting themselves against me because they do not worship me in spirit and in truth. Some of the commentary said that Gomer was either a cult prostitute or maybe she became unfaithful after she married Gomer. But we can understand this as prophetic symbolism of God's relation to Israel. This was the Lord's experience as he saw it as being rejected by his people. They have some children. They named the girl Not Loved. Wouldn't that be a terrible name, Not Loved? They name their son Not My People. Wow, God has rejected his people. And Israel has been unfaithful. She is seen as the bride. God is seen as the groom. Judgment is coming, but where judgment comes, we always can see in God's prophets that restoration will come eventually. This theme is repeated. Israel sinned, judgment is coming, restoration is eventual. Can we take the book of Homer as literal? I believe we can. God has called his prophets to do a lot of weird things. One prophet, which we haven't read about yet, is told to walk naked and barefoot for 3 years. Another prophet is told to lie on his side for over 300 days. Another prophet's told to eat doo-doo. Yep, doo-doo. And he says, oh, don't make me do that. And I think God actually relents, but we haven't gotten there yet. So, yes, we can see the book of Homer as literal, that God did ask him to marry this prostitute Gomer as a symbol of how God is feeling and has been treated by Israel. God's messages in Hosea 1, verse 4 and 5, he is going to punish King Jehu's dynasty to avenge the murders he committed at Jezreel. And if you're confused about that, Jehu killed Ahab, which was a good thing because he was commanded by God through Elisha to do that. However, he took it a step too far. He killed Joram, Ahaziah, the king of Judah, and 42 of Ahaziah's relatives, all coming from the house of David. This was not ordained by God. The second thing Hosea says is God's message is that God will bring an end to Israel's independence and break its military power in Jezreel. This happens about 25 years later in 722 BC. And, well, maybe not quite 25 years, because the time period is getting short. We'll say about 10 to 15 years now in 722 BC when Assyria comes in and attacks the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, which is Samaria. We see a word picture, the children of God, in Hosea 1, verse 11. The people of Judah and Israel will unite, choose one leader, and return from exile. They will be called the children of God. And Paul understood this in Romans 11, verse 25 to 32. Paul, in the book of Romans, refers back here to Hosea. In Hosea chapter 2, we see the character of God. This is really great. I love this part. Hosea chapter 2, verse 2, the charges brought against Israel. Israel is called the unfaithful wife. Let's look at this in verse 2. It says, she, Israel, is no longer my God, my wife, for I am no longer her husband. We see here a picture of a loveless marriage. down in verse 6, I will block her path with a wall to make her lose her way. When she runs after her lovers, she won't be able to catch them. And of course, the lovers here refer to any idol in Israel's life. They had many other physical gods that they worshipped, but there was also such things as pride in their heart. They loved their culture. They loved their things, their possessions, pride. They were proud of their military. The women were proud of their clothes and everything that they had. They had turned away from the Lord. And here we see God will prevent her access to these things. I just have to stop, and I see an application here that God prevents and sometimes takes us from those things in our life that are leading us away from Him. It could be money, it could be power, it could be consumerism, it could be anything. But God oftentimes leads us from, and we think it's somehow punishment, but what He's actually doing is taking us from those things that are turning our heart against Him, because He wants us to worship Him as number one and love Him first of all in our life. It says in verse 7, then she will think, I might as well return to my husband, for I was better off with him than I am now. God wants reconciliation. He doesn't want divorce. And I just want you to see that in this book of Hosea. Verse 11, I will put an end to her annual festivals. God does this after the exile. The people cannot worship their annual festivals anymore. It says, continuing in verse 11, her new moon festivals and her Sabbath days. They had corrupted the meaning and the purpose and the practice of the festivals, and so God says, I just can't have you practice in this way anymore. I will put an end to these. In the millennial reign, it is said that they will return to these festivals, but for now in history, Israel is not sacrificing, and they are not participating as they did before. And then in verse 13, we see the basic problem. It says, when she put on her earrings and jewels and went out to look for her lovers, she forgot all about me. This is the basic problem. Israel has forsaken God, and they are refusing to put their trust in Him. You know, it is so easy when we forget about the Lord. It is so easy during times of prosperity. It's just so easy to get busy in what it is that we have to do today, that we forget our quiet time. Our heart becomes divided, and we forget our first love. And that's what we are beginning to see in Hosea. So I would just encourage you to continue reading Hosea over the next couple of days and look at it through a lens of God's broken heart. And try to apply it to your life. Look at it. Yes, it was written for Israel, but we can take it to heart that this is how God feels when we, too, turn away or forget Him or have a divided heart. So what is the Lord asking you today to remember or to forget? And how is He calling you to return back to Him, your first love? Just something to think about today. Well, we're out of time. We're going to continue in the book of Hosea over the next couple of days, and I encourage you to continue in your reading, and I can't wait to see you again. Shalom and blessings to you until we meet again.